Good evening, and I welcome you all on behalf of my team on the last day of Brain Awareness Week, an initiative by International Brain Research Organization, Dana Foundation, and Federation of European Neuroscience Societies. I'm Vyoma Shah, the organizer of the event, a master's student of neuropsychology, and the moderator for this session. I hope everyone who have joined us today is safe and healthy, and especially during this lockdown, mentally healthy. But unfortunately, regardless of the lockdown, there are several people across our nation and the world who have thought, attempted, or given up their lives. To talk about this sensitive issue today, we have with us Dr. Anjali Chhabria, founder of Mind Temple, director of the Salam Bombay Foundation, and the author of Death is Not the Answer. She will enlighten us with what, why, and hows of suicide, and more importantly, how to face those kind of situations. The topic is suicide and brain. Ma'am, I request you to lead us to the session.
Ma'am, we can start.
Ma'am, you can start the session, please. Ma'am, please unmute your mic. We can't hear you.
Hello. Yeah. And this is something that I have been talking for now. Maybe last 3 to 4 years, I've been addressing a lot of people on this topic because ever since I was asked to write this book, that is not the answer. That is where my journey with suicide has actually, gone on. Of course, as a psychiatrist, you deal with suicide all the time. But because of the book, that is not the answer, I've been trying to reach out to as many people to kind of share, some knowledge, some insights, and also to learn and also help people to identify a suicidal person because this is something that can be very, very easily prevented. So, we spend lakhs and crores of money on trying to prevent death. Right now we are already seeing what is happening with COVID. But what happens with suicide that we really don't need to spend so much of money on it. We need to spend a lot of effort on it, you know, and it's also very, very easy to do the same. So let me just start a little bit about what is suicide. So, first of all, and why we are talking about it. Now, suicide is the largest or the second largest cause of death in all youth today, the first largest being accidents. So it is estimated that around, say, if there are around 8 lakh of people who die every year out of suicide, one third of them are from India. And that is why it is extremely important that we talk about it and we prevent it. Now, what happens is that in the youth, this is extremely common. So when we are talking about in the youth, we are talking about, see, the age group of 15 to 30 years of age. Yes, even 15-year-olds can think of suicide, can attempt suicide. And that is why it's important for us to learn about it and to see how we need to prevent it. So when we go on to what is the definition of suicide, today the definition of suicide is when somebody actually kills themselves. Okay, so that it's a deliberate act to kill yourself. Now, what is the suicidal attempt? An attempt is an act to kill yourself, but a completed suicide is when a person has killed themselves. Then there are different terms which go with suicide, which I will just tell you about. One is an active suicidal ideation, where people are actively thinking of killing themselves, whereas there is a passive suicidal ideation, where people just think that, oh, it's better if I was dead. It's better, they're walking on the road, they'll say that, it's better if someone runs the car over me. So this is the difference between active and passive suicidal ideas. Then there is also something else which is called a deliberate self-harm. Now, what does that mean? That means that a person is trying to harm themselves, but it is not necessary that they want to kill themselves. So these are some of the terms which are used, when you're talking about suicide. Now, the topic, the brain and suicide. So, of course, we all know a lot of people who have died by suicide. And these are people, they could be friends that you've lost, they could be famous figures. Now, every time a famous person kills themselves, it becomes news. People will start trying to find out, why is it that this person killed themselves? Is it because of the stress? Just recently we heard about an actor who killed herself. And again, there was a lot of speculation. Is it because there's financial stress? Was it relationship? And we are all the time trying to find triggers around us. The fact is that a lot of people have these triggers, but everybody in the same situation may not kill themselves. So, why is it that some people go to the extreme end of killing themselves, whereas there are some who will keep coping with all the stresses that they have and not think of suicide as an answer? So, there have been lots and lots of studies which have been done, and there are some things that come out. So, one of it is that, of course, there's a certain population that cannot respond to stress as well as the other populations. So, who are these populations? So, one is, of course, the youth. Now, is it that all the youth want to kill themselves? Definitely not. Youth is a time to have a lot of fun and to enjoy themselves. Then, why is it that there are some of them who want to kill themselves? So, genetics is extremely important where the brain is concerned. So, if we look into people who've decided to take their life, we will see genetic studies will tell us that there will be some link, there will be some relative of theirs who has either committed suicide, and that is extremely important. The second thing we see is that the personality of the person killing themselves. There have been again lots and lots of studies which show that people who are more suicidal are the introverts, the ones who do not really share too much of their personal information with other people compared to extroverts. These people could also be pretty intelligent and intense, and because of that, they tend to overthink and overanalyze a lot of stuff. What is the role of stress in suicide? Of course, stress can add as a trigger. Stress can push people over the edge. But it is not stress alone that kills people. Substance abuse and suicide is something that is extremely common. 75% of people who kill themselves are supposed to be under the influence of some substance or the other. So, alcohol and drugs. This is again something that a lot of youth may resort to when they are under stress because it is easily available and because their peer group may tell them that, okay, come on, it's okay, you're feeling so stressed, why don't you have a drink, why don't you smoke up? And this actually, what happens is that when they resort to such measures, for some time, temporarily the anxiety goes down, but actually the depression increases. Psychiatric disorders and suicide, again, is extreme, it's linked to each other. But is every person who commits suicide having a psychiatric disorder? No. There are impulsive suicides which we find that there is no psychiatric disorder associated with it. But a lot of people are under depression when they actually take this step. So it's extremely important that these disorders are identified and these disorders are treated. Where psychiatric disorders are concerned, a lot of people may not know this, but 50% of psychiatric disorders may start under the age of 14. So by the time is 14, there is already a psychiatric disorder which has started, but which has not been identified because, again, lack of awareness, lack of education, and also the person may not share this information with anyone else, or the family or friends may just think that, oh, he just has mood swings. And the other problem that happens is that nobody questions people about suicide, you know. So because of this, a lot of these people go undetected. So let us just little bit talk about how psychiatric disorders can make someone suicidal. So a lot of people have heard about depression. Now when people are depressed, there is a lot of negative thinking that happens and a lot of obsessive ruminations that may happen. There is in the youth, especially, what we see is that the youth are over concerned about either their appearance and may have low self esteem and low self image. And because of that, if somebody just feels, if someone just kind of teases them and saying, oh, you're so dark, you're so fair, whatever, you have curly hair, they may start worrying too much about it and may get obsessed about it and keep looking at themselves in the mirror and only keep looking at that one feature which is bothering them. When this happens to them, they kind of get obsessive about it and keep sinking into their depression. Now, typical of the youth is that they may not share what they are feeling with their family and friends. They may also become rebellious and they may also keep thinking about it and stop eating, get obsessed with their looks, have eating disorders, have sleeping disorders. Insomnia is very common. Sometimes they also reverse their sleep cycle. So what happens is that we will see a lot of youth around us who sleep in the day and who are awake through the night. Now, does it mean that each one of them is depressed? No, it does not mean that. But it is worth looking into it, worth having a conversation with them. And it's extremely simple and difficult to have a conversation with a young person, because if they think that you're trying to give them too much of knowledge without understanding what they think, without understanding what they are going through, they will just shut off from you and they will not open up to you. So it's extremely important to be extremely sensitive with them and to also slowly tread and become friends with them and then ask them very straight and direct questions. A lot of people are not comfortable with asking the question, are you suicidal? But if somebody is showing symptoms of depression and once you've crossed that stage, I think it makes more sense to ask the question directly. What are the other psychiatric disorders that might lead to someone taking this final step of killing themselves? Schizophrenia is again extremely common, and a lot of people are scared to even use the word. Now, what is schizophrenia? Schizophrenia is a thought disorder, and people who have this disorder may sometimes get paranoid, feel that the world is against them. And when that feeling becomes extremely strong, and is coupled with auditory hallucinations, a lot of them may even have hallucinations that people are talking about them, that people want to harm them, and they may actually start hearing one or more voices commenting on their behavior and edging them to take the step. Now, this is extremely distressful for them, and because of that, sometimes that they may actually go and take the final step. Obsessive compulsive disorder is again another psychiatric disorder which is quite distressing. Imagine if you keep getting a recurrent thought, that is called an obsession. And that is a thought that keeps on coming to your mind again and again, again and again. And when that happens to you, you're forced to take some action. The action is the compulsion. Now, sometimes when you get stuck in that cycle, it is extremely frustrating. And because people are frustrated with this, sometimes with this disorder, OCD, they take the final step of killing themselves. There are other disorders too, anxiety disorder, panic disorder, which creates a lot of anxiety. And sometimes people think that it is better to take the step and kill ourselves. Now, these are some of the psychiatric disorders that we see. Normally, what we see in the youth are the triggers like either a broken love affair or scholastic, some underachievement. And also, what happens is that when there is a stressor, all these things come up. And because of that, people take the final step. Now, what happens is that what is the difference? Does this only happen to the youth? No, it can happen to a lot of other people. There are in India, in fact, what we found that, a lot of people know about farmers, but actually, housewives commit suicide many, many more times than farmers. So we need, but what happens is that these suicides may not be reported. These suicides may go as accidental deaths. And because of that, there is no treatment which is given to them. Now, what is actually going on in the brain of a suicidal person? There have been lots and lots of studies to see whether there is any difference in the brain. So, a lot of you may have heard of serotonin. Serotonin is the hormone which is associated in a very lay term with depression. And it has been found that a lot of, serotonin is produced at a lot of places in the brain. And many studies associate loss of serotonin with or a lack of serotonin with depression. And this is especially the prefrontal cortex is a place which is supposed to be hypo-functioning in the brain. And because of that, these people actually, even if everything is going well in their life, they have the best of circumstances, but they just constantly feel a lack of motivation, sadness, and because of that, they feel life is not worth living. There is a triad that we see in people who are suicidal, a triad of hopelessness, helplessness, and worthlessness. When this triad becomes, when there is this, there are this triad comes together. So, for example, if a person is feeling extremely hopeless with the situation, is feeling worthless, and is feeling helpless, that is the time they may decide to take the extreme step. We all may have heard of some people who, in this COVID virus, have also taken the final step. One such case was about this young girl. There was so much stigma associated with her getting the COVID virus. It's as if she had gone out and done something wrong. And she was the mother of a 7-year-old. She got so scared that, she's going to die. The anxiety became so much that she actually went into the bathroom of a hospital and killed herself. Similar was the case of a couple. So, what happens is that when this triad comes together, people think that, instead of me dying, let me just kill myself. We have also seen that there are lots and lots of studies which show a lot of different areas in the brain which are associated with suicide. So, for example, auditory cortex is to do with the auditory hallucinations. So, the brain has different cortex. We have the frontal cortex, we have the temporal, we have the parietal cortex, we have the occipital cortex. Now, what happens is when there are problems in these areas, that is when these people start getting, these areas which are not functioning properly. Okay, that is when you see that these are the areas that need to be treated. Now, how do we do that? Of course, there is a lot of medication, antidepressants, antipsychotics, but what happens is there are also brain stimulation techniques which can attack these areas directly. How an antidepressant works. A lot of you may have heard of SSRIs. Now, SSRIs are supposed to they inhibit the reuptake of serotonin in the brain. So the serotonin concentration starts increasing. That is when the depression lifts up and people start feeling better. Now, depression is a disorder. It is not something that you feel. It is different from disappointment. So these are the people who need the medication. There are also lots and lots of brain stimulation techniques where these areas can be directly stimulated, and because of that, you see that they start functioning properly. Now, in the frontal cortex, there are two frontal cortex, one is the left and one is the right. In depression, typically what we see is a hypofunctioning of the left cortex, and the right one is hyperfunctioning. That means the anxiety is extremely high. So, with stimulation techniques, what we can do is we can somewhere control the functioning of the brain. These are new treatments, but they are available all over the world. And what happens is that they can be used and they do not have side effects. Now, coming to the topic of side effects, a lot of people are hesitant to go meet a psychiatrist because they feel that the psychiatrist is going to overload them with psychiatric medication. And because of that, and there's a lot of stigma associated with even visiting a psychiatrist. Some part of the stigma is that, once you go to a psychiatrist, they will just put you on sleeping pills, and all your life you're going to be taking sleeping pills. The other stigma is that these doctors will give you lots and lots of medicines. The biggest issue is that only mad people visit psychiatrists. Now, a lot of that is changing all over the world. People are reaching out for help, but even then, there is there's a worry to take medicines, and this is something that we need to dispel around us. So it's extremely important that, because what happens is that when people go in to a doctor, the first thing they tell you is, "Oh, doctor, please don't give me medicines. I don't want to take medicines because I'm quite strong." Now, these are some of the myths that we need to dispel when we meet people around us. One of the myths is that only weak people kill themselves. That's not true. I have seen the strongest of people. In fact, every time there is a person who was otherwise doing so well who takes the final plunge, people feel, "Oh my God, he was so strong, he was so positive, he had such good things going around him." There was a lot of such talk even that happened when the actor Robin Williams, he killed himself, or when in India we had this girl who was a successful television star, the Balika Baddu girl. People said, "Oh my God, she had everything. Then why do they do this?" Now, what happens is that positive people, successful people, anybody, just as anyone can get a typhoid or malaria or even the coronavirus, similarly, anyone can get suicidal. Now, what we need to do is, but what happens is people say, "How do we know that people are suicidal?" The fact is that these people talk about it. They tell others that they are feeling suicidal. 7 out of 10 people talk about suicide. when they want to kill themselves. Now, do they go around telling people? No, but they may make statements to their friends. They may tell someone that, I just don't feel like living. I'm so upset. I wish I did not exist. Or they may even go around telling people that, it's so nice to know you, you've really been a good friend. Suddenly, out of the blue, they will call you up. So these are some of the signs that they may give you. Now, there's another myth that says that a person who is suicidal, if you're religious, you can't be suicidal. That's not true. A religious person can be suicidal, a spiritual person can do that. There are different types of suicides also which have been described. One of it is the altruistic suicide, where a person thinks that if he or she is giving up their life, they're doing it for a greater purpose. You know, so this could be maybe in today's situation, if we look at it, if a doctor is going without protective gear into a corona ward and saying, no, I'm going to save people. Now, that, according to him, is an act of altruism, but it's actually a suicidal behavior. Then there have been suicides because of anomie. Now, these are people who feel that they're not important to the world at all. So these are the Durkheim's stages in Durkheim's classification of suicide. Okay, and there are many, many more classifications like that. But what we need to do is, why we are discussing this is because suicide can definitely be prevented. And how we prevent it is by talking about it, by discussing it, by talking in schools, by talking in colleges. People also fear that why, if we talk about suicide, the person might get suicidal. Honestly, that's not true. I remember when there was a suicide in a school, I was called to the school to talk to this bunch of kids. Now, what happened was that this 13-year-old had killed herself, and this happened on a Friday evening. Obviously, the entire school knew about it. On Monday morning, I was asked to come to the school. When I went to the classroom, the principal got a little worried. He said, why have you all called a psychiatrist to the school? If she goes and talks to people, will there be copycat suicides? Now, I could understand his anxiety. And I told him, and he said, please go and tell them everybody dies, and we should not worry if people die. Now, I understood where he was coming from. I reassured him. What followed was a beautiful 1 hour with the kids. We went there. We started with a little prayer for the child. Then I asked them what they were feeling. Kids discussed. Someone felt guilty because they felt that because they were mean to this child had harmed herself. Someone else said that, I wish I had made friends with her. And so the classroom started sharing with each other. But what came up were myths that are in the mind of young kids. Kids know about suicide. So we cannot hold this from them. In fact, we need to discuss this with them so that they feel comfortable discussing mental health, discussing their problems. And we don't have to do it in an extremely serious way. We can do it, we can chat about their mental health. We can have the counselors, instead of sitting in the counseling rooms, should go to the classrooms and talk about them. Parents and teachers, especially when a suicide has happened, should discuss copycat suicides and should discuss mental health with them, because mental health disorders can happen to anybody. Mental health disorders are no longer completely psychological. In fact, it is extremely related to the brain, and every brain is different, every person is different. Normally, what happens is that we are a complex mixture of our genetics, of our personalities, of our environment, and of our support systems. So, if a person, even if genetically, if he is prone, but if he can alter things around them, if he has a brain which is more suicidal than the others, but if we can work around his environment, we can definitely save a lot of unwanted deaths. So I think let's go on with the questions. Velma, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, I can hear you.
Yeah.
Um, just a moment. So, Akarshan Agrawal asks, there is always someone, if there is always someone, if not, then for professionals to get counseling. And if no one's here to hear you, then what would you do about it?
So, first of all, what we need to do is identify people around us. Okay. And the people are always there. It could be a teacher who's put a pat on your back when you were not feeling good. It could be an aunt. It could be an uncle. It could be a friend's father or a friend's mother who you think you can reach out to. And
Right.
if you cannot reach out to anybody, there are lots and lots of helplines. You just need to access those helplines. Sometimes talking to a stranger is easier than talking to a friend. But of course, first look at your friends and tell your friends that you want to discuss something serious with them. I'm sure if you can identify 3 to 4 people, there will always be one person will always be free for you. But sometimes what happens is we only want to talk to that one person. We get dependent on that one person and we feel bad that that one person is not there. And then we start feeling worse about ourselves. So we need to reach out to other people, and sometimes reaching out to a counselor, to an online helpline is easier.
Right. Thank you. Um, Akarshan Agrawal again asks, is there any early symptom in the person who have any suicidal thoughts, as it will be helpful in keeping an eye on him or her?
No, I couldn't hear that. Can you repeat that? Is there any
Are there any early symptoms to
early
identify
symptom?
suicide? Yeah,
Okay,
to
okay,
have.
okay. Yeah. So there are two things. One is that, of course, we need to keep a watch out for people when they are going through stress. Okay. So if you know a friend of yours has had a bad breakup and is a sensitive person, then you need to look out for them. And even if you cannot look out for them alone, make a group of friends and all of you can share the responsibility. Now, there could be other stressors like maybe a failure in an examination, or if somebody is going through a lot of stress at home with their parents and you know about it. The other thing is, LGBT, the group that goes through, these people can also get extremely suicidal. So we need to watch out for. And now what do they do is, as I said, they talk about it. So we need to keep our ears open and we need to keep our eyes open. So if you have a friend who's locked himself or herself up in a room, is not coming out, even if you all are trying to reach out to them, they just don't want to communicate, pay special attention to this friend. If any of your friend is drinking excessively, is smoking excessively, is showing anger outbursts, is showing signs of depression, pay extra attention to this friend. And the other thing which I would also like to say is that if you know any of your friends who is suicidal, now this is not a secret. Sometimes people tell you, okay, I'm just going to tell you a secret. I'm not going to be there, I want to kill myself. This is a secret you need to break. Okay, you need to reach out either to his parents or her parents. Don't think he or she is just saying it and they're not going to do it. Because the next day, if you wake up in the morning and you come to know that your friend has acted on that impulse, you will be very, very upset. So it is better to, kind of, you're not really breaking your friendship by reaching out to their loved ones, but it is better to reach out and get that person some help. Yes, Vyoma. Yeah, next question, please.
Yes, ma'am. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah. So, do techniques like meditation and introspection help in having a positive outlook and not drift towards suicidal tendencies?
So, meditation, yoga, exercise help everybody. Okay. But It's not that, so it will help all of us to feel better. But if a person is suffering from a psychiatric disorder, if a person is suffering from, a mood disorder like a bipolar disorder, meditation will help to lessen it, but it will not cure it. We need to take medication for that. We need to go to a psychiatrist. We need to meet a therapist and work on ourselves. So these are techniques which will help everybody, but you cannot replace medication with meditation. It will just help us to feel a little better.
And how do we deal with suicide of a friend or a family member on a personal level?
So what happens is, whenever there is a suicide in the family or with your friends, definitely it is extremely distressing, because every one suicide leaves at least 100 people affected by it. Okay, and the family definitely goes through a lot of guilt. It's like there's a lot of stigma associated. There are people who will say, oh my god, iske ghar mein to suicide hua tha, and that really creates more of a problem. People start looking at you as if you are to be blamed. So at such a time, it is important to maybe become a part of a suicide group. There are a lot of groups which have support groups which have started. It's important to take therapy for yourself too, so that when you talk to a therapist, you realize. And many a times, I tell people is that, when a doctor goes into an ICU, he can save a lot of lives, but he may not be able to save all the lives. So similarly, maybe you've helped this friend to live longer than he or she has wanted to live, but eventually it is not you to blame. And so it's important to get over that guilt, get over the blame, and talk to people, talk to your close ones. So if it is a family member, talk to the other family members and help each other to cope with it. But definitely therapy helps you to get over it, and to, I mean, of course, one can never get over it, but at least, the pain can become a little lesser.
Yes, ma'am. And I think for the last question for the day, we have a question from one of our viewers on YouTube. So the question is, depression has been known to have genetic markers.
Right.
So, and how is the transference? Like, how substantially can we establish the fact that someone who had suffered from depression,
Mhm.
and say for their example, for their offsprings would tend to be suicidal in the near future?
So, first of all, I mean, this is a question that comes pretty often. In fact, I've had people who come and say, oh my God, I'm going through depression. I don't want to have kids, because what if I have kids who are depressed? But let me explain to you that mood disorders are extremely common. In fact, WHO studies tell us that 1 out of 4 to 5 people, in India is suffering from a psychiatric disorder. Now, if you're looking at that figure, that means every family has people. Okay. Now, even though it is, and suicide also can be genetic. Okay. Now, there are different markers which are being studied, and exactly we do not know which are. It's not that you can just go to the lab and do a study and say, ki, okay, do I have the genetic marker for suicide? A lot of research is going on, a lot of things are being identified, but we've still not cued in to anything that is translating into practice. So what I would say is that what we can do is that we have to try and help. Once you identify it, even if you identify it young, the best thing is to go and start taking help for these people, and also help yourself to communicate better with them. Okay. And then, of course, it's like, I would say that we are still at the phase where we're not even helping people. People are not being identified. So if we can work on that, we'll be able to turn a lot of people who have suicidal ideas, and who have attempted it in the past. I have personally met people who've attempted suicide at least 25, 30 times, and following that, following therapy, following treatment, they are, they're living a full life where now death is not an option for them. any longer.
I think that was really informative when you said that the crucial step in the whole process is identification. I think that is something which I don't think many of us are aware of. Once we identify, and like you had suggested, reaching out for help for both the victim and the friends and family is something that we need to look out for.
Right.
This has been a very informative talk, ma'am. Thank you so much for taking our invite and speaking on Brain Awareness Week.
Thank
This has
you.
been an honor having you on our talk
Thank you.
series.
And thank you. And sorry for all the technical glitches that happened before we started.
That's completely all right. So that is why we had our YouTube broadcast on, and it went on smooth. We were able to give you questions from YouTube as well, and I
Okay.
hope the participants had a very informative session. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you. And for the participants, we have our last talk for Brain Awareness Week, and it will be on the fundamentals of fMRI at 9 p.m. today. So we look forward to seeing you there. Thank you.